Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Am reading video for Friday, January 15th, 2021, on a Saturday, as is my custom. That being said, I made it through 2 books this week, which is pretty good for me, aided in part, I'm sure, by the fact that I have been forcibly staying home from work these past few days and will continue to into next week because I work in Capitol Hill in DC, in an area that is rife at the moment with inauguration coming up for insurrection or other violent acts. Hopefully not as bad as last week, but I can vouch for all of the National Guard and police presence downtown. So, but anyway, this week I've read 2 historical fiction novels from about the mid-20th century, and both are published by small presses. This first one is One More River by Mary Glickman, published by One Road Integrated Media. I think their main thing is to republish backlist titles, but they also do a couple of their own unique ones, and this is among them. This is a story that takes place roughly from the 1920s to the 1960s. In dual timeline, in fact. In the main timeline, in the early 60s, we are following Mickey Mo Levy, a young Jewish man living in Guilford, Mississippi. He is about to marry his lady love, Laura Ann, from another prestigious Jewish Southern family who is less than enthused by the match, in part because Mickey Mo's father, who was killed in World War II, has a unknown background, heaven forbid. So this is in part Mickey Mo trying to get to the truth about his father, and of course the second timeline gets the reader up to snuff about who his father really is, and follows young Bernard Levy through his exploits in the South, mostly in Mississippi and Tennessee in the 1920s. I thought it was a propulsive book, although with this book and the next book, I feel like there is some language that's a little too narrative heavy, a little too passive in exposition. It's such a fine line to walk, really, in writing fiction because, you know, not everything can be action all the time, and sometimes you do need to get other information across, and sometimes you need to summarize events, but I don't know, it just sort of got to me that maybe it was a little too much in these books, a little too passive. That being said, you know, the historical stuff really, it grabbed me. I was intrigued. You know, this is a location and culture in American history and society that I'm not as familiar with as perhaps I should be. So I appreciated the look back, especially with regards to the Great Flood of 1927, which Glickman was able to put Bernard Levy and some friends in the middle of, and to remind myself how dangerous river life could be. There's also nods and references in here to various events that were riling America at the time. In the 60s, of course, we have the Civil Rights Movement, and as Mickey Mo and Laura Ann you know, travel across state lines, they are privy to some violent events in that vein. And meanwhile, Bernard turns out, spoiler alert, that his background isn't quite so upper crust pristine, and after having a rather rough and tumble upbringing with a very low-class family, he goes off on his own and befriends some African-American characters. And in fact, his first lady love is not Mickey Mo's mother, but is an African-American woman who he spends some time with. So Glickman is trying to showcase a bit of what the African-American community in the South had to put up with during this time, as these characters travel throughout the South looking for menial labor. In terms of Judaism, it was heavier on the idea of the lines that Jews had to walk with regards to when they were considered white and when they were considered other. So it had more to do with the perception from non-Jews and anti-Semitism and that sort of thing, although there were some nods to Jewish culture, like a Reform synagogue, that sort of thing. But in general, what Glickman, I think, was implicitly stating was that for a lot of Southern Jews, it really was sort of Southern culture first, and then Judaism second. Though they still kind of, were a little bit set apart in their own community. So yeah, this was in part historical exploration. It was also a bit of a Bildungsroman for Mickey Moe. Perhaps not so much what he found out about his father, but what he personally went through on the road, and him and his relationship with Laura Ann in the face of, their parents and sort of backlash in that area. And it does, the book is framed by Mickey Moe being a soldier in Vietnam, so his life kind of comes close to his father's life, in that significant part of it is spent in the war theater. Well, significant for Bernard in that he ended up dying in the war. Things are a little less certain for Mickey Moe. I don't want to spoil much, so I guess I will leave it there. The second book I read is called Apple of Sodom, An American Woman's Journey in Jordan by Mary Hoffman, and it is put out by a small local-to-me press, Brick House Books in Baltimore. This book also predominantly takes place in the 60s. We are following the Crawford family. They are American expatriates who moved to Jordan, to Amman particularly, because the father, Philip, is an engineer, and his American company has sent him to Jordan to work on a water project there, about moving water around the country. It's an interesting time for Jordan. I tend to see things in the Middle East through an Israeli-tinged lens. That's mostly what I know about the Middle East comes from an Israeli center. Jordan is Israel's neighbor, and in the 60s it was a vanishing time, I call it, because it was before the reunification of Jerusalem. This 60s setting gave the Crawford family the chance to visit Jerusalem from a Jordanian perspective when the city was still divided. And talk a little bit in that vein about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, particularly since at the time the vast majority of Palestinian refugees were in Jordanian land. We also get inference into other historical and cultural realities for Jordan and the Middle East. And I think for the most part it was all filtered through the characters, which, because this is a novel, that's something that's kind of important to me, that, this is not supposed to be, lazy nonfiction, a way for, an author to, I don't know, ramble out some facts, but we have to actually perceive it through the characters that she creates. And in this case, this is a, predominantly told from Emily, the young wife and mother who is in a frayed marriage with a blowhard of a man. We get to see a little bit of their courtship in some of the chapters that take us back through time. From what I could infer, it's sort of like kind of being stuck, and you're a Midwestern middle-class woman, and it's sort of expected that you're supposed to marry and settle down, and he was who was there. Philip is an interesting sort of character in that his blowhard personality really jumped off the page, but there was really nothing that was redeemable about this guy. So he could be very tiring to follow. Although, again, I guess it was very propulsive, both, just to, learn about the history as Emily perceived it through her travels and her interactions with people in Jordan. And then also just the family dynamics as well, as Emily is struggling with the fact that her marriage is kind of awful. And her kids' relationship with her father is also pretty awful. I kind of wish we got more of that. I realize I'm walking a fine line here. You don't want things to get too melodramatic. But I think Hoffman maybe was a little too narrative heavy on flitting from one external event to another, and introducing us to a few too many secondary characters. And I think we could have fleshed out a little bit more, with a little more focus perhaps on some primary characters and relationships. hopefully without getting too melodramatic. But this is a book certainly where most of the story beats about climax and resolution happen in the smaller part 2 part of the book, whereas we're sort of more meandering through characters and inferences in part 1. But still, again, I was engrossed the entire time and impressed again by the filtering of the history through the characters. Plus, this is a nice example of a book that really, because this is such a small press, it won't get a lot of play, but I do think a lot of readers could be taken with the story if they had access to it. So here's me propping it up. And finally, next on the docket is Fields of Exile by Nora Gould. This comes from a Canadian publisher, Dundurn. I think I said that right, out of Toronto. So I will link to all 3 of the publishers I mentioned down below. I recently included this book in a book haul because I asked for it for the holidays because this is near the top of my Goodreads TBR now. And so I figured I would get to reading it sooner or later, and its time has come up. I just gave a brief synopsis in the book haul about what it's about, so I will read from the back here. Judith is a young woman who lived in Israel for a decade, was a peace activist there, and defines herself as left-wing. Yet in graduate school back in Canada, she discovers that vilification of Israel is the expected norm. When the keynote speaker for the Anti-Oppression Day turns out to be a supporter of terrorist attacks, not only against Israeli military targets, but also against Israeli civilians and Jews around the world, Judith protests. As a result, she is marginalized by the faculty and her peers, and her life begins to unravel. This is a moving novel about love, betrayal, and the courage to stand up for what one believes, as well as a searing indictment of the hypocrisy and intellectual sloth that threatens the integrity of our society. So, yeah. The thing for me with this one is that there's a lot in here that, I've seen personally, experienced, or seen through the news about the left and their relationship with Israel, and how I think there can be some blind spots when it comes to empathy and nuance and understanding that situation and the people involved there. Though also this is certainly a subject that can lead to didactic opinions from the Israeli and Jewish perspective as well. So it's a fine line to walk, and again, as I was discussing in a previous book, this is still a novel, so I need to feel things as filtered through characters and not just some sort of treatise or reporting. So I'm hoping she can stick the landing, and I'll see how I feel and report back. So that about covers it for me now. Feeling pretty optimistic in terms of my reading. The last few months I've only gotten through 6 books per month, which is fine, but it's at the lower end of what I'd want to do per month. And this month so far I'm putting my pedal to the metal and hoping that I can go ahead and make it on to 8 books. So we'll see. I'm going to be adding a book to that TBR coming up in my next video, my page 112 tag video. These videos I look forward to a whole bunch. It's just a personal passion project, I guess, started by Sean the Book Maniac, where he took a literary prize where they read from page 112 to add it to a short list. And he brought that idea to Booktube in whatever fancy we might like to use it. And for me, for the last several months, I've been choosing 3 books at random from my unread shelves and pitting them against each other. So stay tuned. And I also have another reading and Booktube related project to deal with, which is the Booktube Prize. The Booktube Prize is about to rev up in February as well. I'm so excited. I'm hoping to judge in the octafinals. And in the meantime, I have these lists of contenders for the long lists in fiction and nonfiction. I'm pretty sure I've picked the ones that I want to personally vote for to make the long list, but I'm biding my time because it's not technically due yet for me to submit them, but I doubt I'll be making any changes, so maybe I should just go ahead and do it. Anyway, I'll link to Booktube Prize information down below as well. So we are halfway through January already, if that is possible. Don't know if things are going way too fast or way too slow. It's still just a crazy time around here. But but at least I'm enjoying all of my reading so far, so huzzah! I hope you are too. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.